Hello and welcome to Symphony Notes, the season-long podcast featuring the conductor of the Annapolis Symphony Orchestra, José-Luis Novo. I'm David Srebnik, and we're here to talk about the upcoming season of the Annapolis Symphony Orchestra. The 2019-2020 season begins on Friday, continues on Saturday at Maryland Hall. The program features music by Beethoven, Gershwin, and Rachmaninoff. So September means many things, back to school, and in this case, back to Maryland Hall. This is an exciting time, an adventurous time. Tell me how you're approaching the season.
Well, when you start a new season, you have that feeling. I think it's a little bit similar to when you go back to school or when you go back to work after vacations. You are excited, you are nervous, you are anxious, but definitely very motivated to get started because there is so much interest in the work that we are going to do. For me personally, that I can't wait to actually get started on preparing the music and performing the music that we are performing this season.
So there's a theme for this season, which is tied into the 250th birthday of Beethoven. It's being called the Beethoven Year.
Yeah.
And so orchestras and institutions and venues around the world will all have Beethoven events. And what strikes me about the season and this theme that you've chosen is that you decided it's not enough just to play his music. You wanted to do something more, and you're calling it Beethoven Discovers America.
Well, as you say, Beethoven doesn't need any help to be performed. But what we do at the symphony, the Annapolis Symphony, we always like to do things meaningfully. And for me, the Beethoven anniversary was one more excuse to explore in which ways it would affect the music that we should be more exposed to, which is American music and the music from American composers. And that's an excellent setup with Beethoven's anniversary to make these connections. And that's exactly what we are doing. We are calling this season Beethoven Discovers America. So we are going to be performing the music of Beethoven, but also what did Beethoven mean in the music, in the world of classical music, and how that affected the classical music that appeared in this country later on, and how his output influenced the input from composers that either were born in the States or came to the States to establish themselves. So we are going to be exploring both elements, the native American composers, but also the American composers that came from somewhere else and they became Americans after the fact.
So that leads us to Gershwin. Mm-hmm. You're playing the Concerto in F, the Piano Concerto in F major, with pianist Stewart Goodyear. So how might we hear or experience Gershwin in light of Beethoven and Beethoven's legacy?
Well, Beethoven exemplifies pretty much the core repertoire of classical music at all levels, not only symphonic, but also chamber music, choral, not so much operatic, because Beethoven only wrote one opera, but it's a big pillar in the classical music world. Gershwin is someone that sort of inherited that, but had a stronger connection with the popular music world. And so he had to sort of put the two worlds together in a way that almost nobody else had done at the time, especially in the States. And I think he managed pretty well. He was extremely gifted. He was the son of Russian Jewish immigrants. So there is, again, the connection of immigrants from a different land into the States. And he had a strong connection with the theatrical events going on in New York, where he was living when he was born in Brooklyn. So he he developed this connection to Broadway very quickly, writing songs, and that became second nature for him. And eventually he came into writing pieces for bigger instruments such as voice and piano, and eventually he came to write big pieces like the piano concerto, bringing together the popular element and all the elements of the classical music that he was supposed to know as a classical music composer. At the time, I suspect it was not as easy as we see it now, because now we think, of course, Gershwin had so much talent. Why would we think that it was difficult for him? But if we just know that Gershwin went to study to Paris, and we have this, tracked conversations with Maurice Ravel and such people asking for advice and on how to become a great composer. And Ravel told him, you are already a great composer. You already do what you should do. Don't try to change what you have.
I think he was actually asking if he could take a lesson or two from Ravel.
Yeah.
And Ravel said, no, thank you.
Ravel was so impressed that Gershwin had learned how to incorporate the jazz elements in his music so seamlessly. And Ravel was actually very interested in jazz and was hinting at those elements, but in a way that was so much more laborious, so to say.
Could you describe that journey of jazz and jauntiness with the other elements in between?
Sure. I think this is one of the great things about the piano concerto has a rhapsodic quality in that the music sounds fresh and the music flows easily, because that's one of the qualities of Gershwin, writing in a way that appears seamless. But it is true that you go through all these emotions of great passages of excitement and great musical rhythmic drive, but then also you have the blues and the more nostalgic, and it's all put together in a way that it's incredibly organic. I don't think that Gershwin was thinking in terms of structure that much, but structurally is quite how to put it. It's like a building that has been very nicely thought out in proportions, and it comes out that way. So by the time you get to the end of the last movement, the third movement, it doesn't feel that long, but it's around 25 minutes long. But the piece really flows from beginning to the end very, very nicely.
Introduce the soloist, Stewart Goodyear. Who is he?
Stewart Goodyear is a great Canadian pianist that I have never worked with, but I am very much looking forward to working with him. And we chose him for this program because, as you probably know, he's a big Beethoven fan. He's recorded all the Beethoven piano sonatas. I think he's performing all the Beethoven piano concertos this season with other orchestras. So he's already doing that Beethoven side on his own. So that already is a great connection to the theme that we are exploring. But he's also, a great Gershwin pianist. So I think that he's kind of like the ideal pianist for this concerto in this setting.
He also performs these amazing sonatathons, where over a couple of days he performs all 32 sonatas. So that's quite a feat and speaks to his
endurance, among other things.
Exactly. So the program concludes, I believe, with the Rachmaninoff Symphony No. 3. Here's a composer who moved to America and clearly established himself as an American citizen, American composer, citizen. But there's something about this Symphony No. 3 by Rachmaninoff in that he shed some of his trademark compositional language, and he went in a new direction, or new directions, which reminds me of Beethoven. And
I think this is where you find all these connections, not to mention that Beethoven, Gershwin, and Rachmaninoff all were virtuoso pianists and concert pianists. So they all have that element of knowing the music that they write for piano because they can perform it. But as you were mentioning, Rachmaninoff had a difficult relationship with the symphonic world as a composer, because his first symphony was a very bad experience, and it had nothing really to do with him. It was more the fact that the conductor at the time was, we know by the chronics, was literally drunk. So he didn't do a very good job. The premiere was a disaster, and that provoked a reaction in Rachmaninoff's attitude to the symphonic form that lasted the rest of his life. He had to go through therapies, hypnotic therapy, to recover from that. And then that's when he wrote the Second Piano Concerto, which was a great success. And then he went on to write other great symphonic works that sort of got him away from that traumatic experience of his first symphony. But nevertheless, the Third Symphony came 30 years later from the second, which is probably his best known one. So that tells you that he wasn't writing symphonies as easily as Beethoven was. Although Beethoven himself also went through that type of struggle between certain number of symphonies. So we hear the traits of Rachmaninoff music in that of the melodic affinity that he has for melodies that flow very gently, and then they build up in ways that only he knows how to do. But we also have the connections to these dies irae motifs that they were constant through his life. Those are going to come up, and the return of thematic materials that he works all over again in different ways, the same way as Beethoven did. So you see many similarities with how Beethoven treated his music motivically in Rachmaninoff. But at the same time, Rachmaninoff was trying to be courageous and being different than what he had been done. I'm not sure that was perceived at the time, because I think that the people were expecting a symphonic work that was closer to his Second Symphony. This one is more personal, has more exploration of different moods, but it's a brilliant work, and I think that it's a great example of how a great composer evolves through their career.
Yeah. That dies irae notion you mentioned is sort of the death chant, the death. He was fascinated. And
I think he was obsessed.
Obsessed.
Yeah, and it shows, but I think it's much more subtle in this piece, as opposed to, for instance, the symphonic dances that would come the year later, or the Rhapsody on the Rhapsody on a theme by Paganini for piano, which is also very clearly. So it's all, I think, camouflage with experience.
And we should say not as schmaltzy as perhaps the Rhapsody on the theme of Paganini, but nonetheless purely Rachmaninoff.
Purely Rachmaninoff, and you're going to get the luscious sound and the great melodies and the gorgeous climaxes that he does. So it's going to be very enjoyable. So
save Beethoven to the last. Drama and dramatic hardly covers the Egmont Overture, but there are some other softer moments in between, but certainly here's some Beethoven anger and rage.
Absolutely, and I think he was very good at it. And I think this overture is a mini cosmos of the some of the elements that he was after in the music that he wrote for the play. The Goethe's play was obviously complex, and the music that Beethoven eventually wrote was also complex. But I think that the journey was more complex than what it needed to be. And I think in the end, the overture is what has become standard repertoire, because the overture captures the journey of the character of Egmont better than almost anything else in the rest of the music that he wrote. So we go through all those kinds of moods and characters that the play portrays. The oppression of the people in Flemish countries with the Hispanic Empire at the time, and then the character of Egmont that is going to be the liberating factor, and this quest of Beethoven for freedom that is pretty much a leitmotif through his life, which is, I think, one of the most American things you can think of. That's where I think that you have the connections of Beethoven Discovers America so clearly stated. So we are going to go through all that, and then the glorious ending, triumphant, that he can do like no one else.
The Annapolis Symphony Orchestra begins their 2019-2020 season on Friday and Saturday. Tickets are available at AnnapolisSymphony.org. Thank you very much, and thank you.